Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to Side Streets and Intersections here on IntellectualRadio.com. I am your host, Angela Champ, and if you're looking for an opportunity to explore hosting your own show, please do not hesitate to call 708-223-8953. And on today's subject matter, are you being bullied in the workplace? So often we get these jobs and we're so grateful to be employed and to be able to pay our bills. However, we have to ask what comes along with that. Does the employer have a right to exercise due diligence to provide an environment that is safe? Well, let me give you some alarming facts. But before I do that, let's identify what bullying is. It is the mistreatment severe enough to compromise a targeted worker's health, jeopardize his or her health, monetary value, and work-life balance. See, so often we think that we have to endure being mistreated. So the question is, have times really changed? And by that, I mean, we're supposed to be so far away from racism and slavery, but are we really just indentured servants, paying a debt that will never be paid? So we want to now hone in on, when we think of bullying, we think of high schoolers and we think of kids taunting one another about things that are insignificant. But it is real and it is true and it is happening. According to a 2014 survey done by the Bullying Institute, now it's a shame that they have to have an institute to research these statistics. More than 65 million adults are bullied in the workplace. Those are staggering numbers. Now, one would say, well, I wouldn't let that happen. But let me tell you how it happens. You go to work one day and you decide that you're not going to be disrespected by any superior and or any coworker for that matter. And then they begin to change your assignment. They begin to impose excessive discipline upon you, even as going so far as to tell other coworkers to remove themselves from your company. Those are all forms of bullying. And there's another topic or another title. They employ these Gestapo tactics. Now, for anyone that knows anything about Gestapo, these were tactics used back when Hitler was here. And it was to demean you, to humiliate you, and to make you feel less than desirable. Now, I'm going to break down the difference in being bullied versus harassment. See, bullying, it certainly looks like and it feels like harassment. And so we want to understand that to be harassed is defined as a systemic annoyance and continued actions, which include threats and demands, creating a hostile situation, unwelcome verbal and physical conduct. But at work, harassment is a special term, see. Often workplace harassment connotes sexual misconduct in a hostile work environment. So see, what they try to do is combine the two. They try to say, oh, are you being sexually harassed? When in fact you're being bullied. Because they know that it's more difficult to prove sexual harassment. See, often workplace harassment, it can include a violation of state and federal civil rights that are designed to protect you from discriminatory, disparate treatment. But the problem is, while that sounds good, there was currently no law in place to prevent you from being bullied at work. I mean, that is awful. So, how to know if your health is falling apart if you're being bullied in the workplace? You go to work and you find yourself having headaches, or you find that your production is low, or even in the cases of you find yourself having pains, but they're so quick to label it fibromyalgia, unexplained pain. You find that there is an influx in your blood pressure, or you never had blood pressure before, and now you're upset all the time, or you're agitated. Are you being bullied in the workplace? Once again, remember those numbers I gave you earlier. More than 65 million adults in the workforce are being bullied. Even as I speak, someone is being bullied on their job. And it's awful that an employer would use such tactics as saying that you are psychologically unfit to perform said duties when they don't have anything else. The changes that people go through when they are put out of work, such as becoming homeless, the psychological impact and adverse impact that has on one's life, and even subjecting family members to the harassment, the bullying. Now they too become victims. They call that secondary PTSD. So you ask yourself, are you being bullied at work? Or are you harassed? Is your work being sabotaged, blocked, or stolen? Perhaps you didn't even think of calling it bullying. Because, it's supposed to happen to kids in school. It's not supposed to happen to adults. But it is happening as we speak. It is truly unfortunate that in this day and age that they have these so-called rules and regulations in place that if you are being mistreated on the job, that you should be able to go to your HR department and or your supervisor to report it, and all the other entities they have, such as EEOC and the other entities. And yet when you begin to complain, there's so much red tape. Either you become exhausted by the process or the time exhaust. Are you being bullied at work? It is not acceptable. It is not fun. And most of all, it is not healthy. Is it normal to feel that you're falling apart? Stress is good for everybody. You have competitive stress, which athletes participate in, and even those in the workforce when you want to be better than maybe your coworker at something. And that's okay. A little competitive stress is okay. But when it gets to the point where legal entities have to get involved, now we're talking about something really serious. But even in saying that, most of the time, the employee will not only not win their case, but they will be subjected to further workplace harassment and bullying. So I want my listeners here on IntellectualRadio.com and all my iHeart listeners, have the conversation. I know everybody's enjoying the holiday weekend, but Tuesday will be here very soon. And for some of us, we have to work over the holiday. You ask yourself, you work for an environment that talks about integrity and respect. and yet they don't even respect you, let alone have they not mastered who they are. So how can you treat me respectfully when you don't respect yourself? Then when I ask you to respect me, you say that I'm disgruntled. You say that I'm problematic. There must be something off about this individual because they're not adapting to the cultural norm. Well, what if the cultural norm is an environment that is not conducive to people respecting one another? Just something to think about when you go to work. I know some of y'all, you gotta work tonight. You're getting it in right now. It's a holiday. But are you being bullied? Now, I'm not talking about because you don't like your assignment. I'm not talking about your that. I'm talking about when it's explicit and sometimes it's subtle. Usually it's subtle, but oftentimes if you feel that you are being mistreated, it's because you are. See, what we need to understand is that when will it stop? When will it stop? So then you ask yourself, for example, for individuals who work in entities, there's a lot of insurmountable stress that we are exposed to every day. Then it's compounded by if you don't fit into the clique. And by fitting into the clique, if you're not a drinking buddy, perhaps if you're not sleeping your way to the top, perhaps if you're not telling secrets of another, you're not forging documents, now you become a problem because you are not a part of the cultural norm. But yet they say you're not being bullied, you're just being sensitive. I would beg to differ. I would beg to differ. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be very transparent about my experience that I'm currently going through. And I would hope that you all would tune in, not just particularly for ratings, because I want you to see the face of a person who is being harassed, who is being bullied. Now, one would say, well, you're so articulated, you have education. I just want you to understand that the higher in terms of education you get, the worse it gets. And so sometimes what I understand is that people feel that you are now a threat to them. Instead of embracing change, they would rather resist it. They talk about change, but they're not really changing. It's still the good old boys team. So you ask yourself, how do you have an employee with almost an impeccable record, and now they're placed out because they don't fit into the clique? Well, we can all say, but my name is not Jim Crow, and I won't be jumping, nor will I be asking how high. We're going to take a short musical break, and we're then going to discuss, are you being bullied at work? Until then, I am Angela Champ, your host for Sidestreets and Intersections here on IntellectualRadio.com. Welcome back to Sidestreets and Intersections here on IntellectualRadio.com. It is a beautiful, beautiful weekend. The sun is out. It's a little overcast outside, but it is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And I just want to say, getting back to the subject matter, are you being bullied at work? So, doing my research, I wanted to know, is there a law against workplace bullying in the United States of America? Are you all ready for this? No. Bullying is legal in every U.S. state. Let me repeat that. Bullying in the workplace is legal in every U.S. state. Now, they're working on trying to acquire laws that would prohibit and protect its employees, but currently it's legal. So let's describe or give some depictions of bullying. So, for example, once again, I think I gave some earlier, but I'm just going to kind of reiterate some. And for example, you're assigned to work one area, but they keep moving you. And then when you ask for an explanation, they tell you, well, we can move you where we want to move you. Or every time it comes to promotion, they employ some form of discipline, which now disqualifies you from being promoted. All these tactics. So it's just really interesting. However, there is an anti-bullying legislation called the Healthy Workplace Bill, and the current status can be found at the Healthy Workplace Campaign website. So for you all that are experiencing that, you might want to jump on that. So then you ask yourself, well, can I sue if I'm being subjected to these forms of conduct by my employer? Well, the problem is it's such a, as they say, gray area. Because not unless you can get others to corroborate your story or your findings, it's going to be very, very difficult because most people fear of losing their job. I remember, during my time, I'm an advocate for social change. And being an advocate for social change, you also understand that you now become the victim and the target because you are trying to employ change. We are all talking about change, 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 change. That's the big thing you hear, change. But nobody really wants to accept change. Why? Because it requires you to do something new. It requires you to step outside the box. It requires you to step outside of your comfort zone. Now, it's interesting that you ask yourself, well, how can I prevent these things from happening? And one would think that in order to be bullied at work, then you would have to be someone who's weak, someone who is very docile, someone who is perhaps not well informed of the law and the culture. Well, that is so inaccurate. And you wonder, you say 65 million people. That's a lot of people in the US reporting that they have been bullied. It's alarming. It is alarming. And so I just want to be a beacon of light to you that if you are being subjected to various forms of harassment and bullying in the workplace, that understand you're not crazy. And a lot of times it is not you. Now, could we contribute to the situation? Well, I like to think about that. People want to always say, well, there's a yin, there's a yang. But sometimes you can just show up and people don't like you. You don't have to do anything. You could look a certain way, come from a certain neighborhood, have a certain level of education, and people don't like you. Why? Because it reminds them of their failures in life. And I always tell people that one doesn't have to minimize their successes in order to highlight your failures. I want you to think about that. Now, You say, well, what if you were forced out of your job and now you can't get a job or you can't get unemployment? What can you do? Well, there's certain things that you can do. And although I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not at liberty to give legal advice. I don't want anyone quoting me saying that I gave them some legal advice. However, there are certain entities. There are the EEOCs. There's the National Labor Relations Board, the Human Rights Board. These are all entities that you can reach out, and you have to make sure that, according to their website, that you have viable witnesses if you are being discriminated against, because it is discrimination. Got another one. According to the Bullied Workplace Institute, says that my employer is forcing me into workers' comp. What do I do? Now you are injured by the psychological assault, which is bullying. They're going to give you two options. And according to this website, because I don't want anyone saying that I gave them legal advice, and just to put it out there, it's www.workplacebullying.org, so that I'm not held accountable for any legal ramifications that could come as a result of me discussing this topic. So the employer or HR is going to give you two options: to file a workers' compensation claim or to take family medical time off. You lose either option. See, it says that the workman's comp claim while you're off, you do not pay, and they are not managed by the employer who serves as a judge and jury. After a lengthy sham investigation, including a humiliating psychological exam by one of the employer's preferred referrals. You hear what I'm saying, don't you? Okay. Your stress claim will be denied. If you have forgone pay and lost everything, FMLA is unpaid leave. So it's twofold. You lose the workman's comp claim and you lose out on FMLA, according to www.workplacebullying.org. So for anyone who is going through this, I want you to go to that website. It gives a lot of valuable and good information. So what happens if they subject you to a psychological assessment? Now they want to see how you respond. They may tell you that you're required to take a test over a period of 2 days or 1 day, and then you're going to be judged. And depending on how you answer those questions, or depending on how the test may be skewed, and when I say skewed, it's geared towards one demographic over the other. Are you being bullied at work? It's interesting. So, for most of us that work jobs, we have unions. You want to ask why the union isn't stepping in and helping. Well, they are aware of the tactics that are being employed by the employer. However, we have to understand that sometimes it's all about the bottom line, which is money. If you're paying union dues and they're defending everyone, then they don't make money. That's quite interesting. That's quite interesting for my listeners. So then you ask yourself, now you're in this position and no one has bothered to call you. And maybe even family has now turned their backs on you because there must be something if they said something's wrong. That's not necessarily so. The problem is that people fear losing their jobs. And although you would want people to do the right thing, any realist knows that it's in rare instances that a person is going to jeopardize their liberty, their finances, and their work-life balance for you. So my thing is, don't get mad if you find yourself in this fight alone, because it is a lonely fight. And then you ask yourself, well, perhaps you are the most skilled person that works in your corporation. And perhaps that you started off maybe as a low-level employee, but now you have acquired a certain level of education that not only qualifies you, but quantifies you to be an asset to your corporation. Well, here's the catch with that. Are you connected? Are you connected? Meaning, are you willing to do what it would take in order to get to the top? And sometimes that requires one to compromise this thing we call integrity. Because oftentimes it's not what you know, but it's who you know. Are you being bullied in the workplace? You know, it's really interesting that I would ask that for my listeners and those that are viewing us, that you would do your research. If someone is trying to place a label upon you, it is not for you to live up to that life script. See, when people assign labels to you, they're assigning to you what we call, or what is called, a life script. So, for example, say that you have someone has called you crazy, and now you begin to act bizarre and do things. You are now living up to that life script that they've assigned you. And then it's a catch-22, because you've been so mistreated that when you try to act or change, they don't want to accept the change. So they continue to place this label upon you. And we all know that we all can change if given the opportunity. I'm going to take a musical break right now, and we're going to come back and we're going to continue to discuss bullying in the workplace. It's not your fault. I am Angela Cham, here for Sidestreets and Intersections, here on IntellectualRadio.com. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. I am Angela Champ for Side Streets and Intersections here on IntellectualRadio.com. And we just want to say that we are an iHeartRadio station, so please tune in. We can be heard throughout the country, U.S. And if you are looking for an opportunity to explore hosting your own show, please do not hesitate to call 708-223-8953. Now, I had a listener wanted me to break down the difference between harassment versus bullying. So I'm just going to go back over what was noted by this particular study. Now, bullying certainly looks and feels like harassment. It is harassing a commonly understood, defined, and systematic, annoying, and continued actions, which includes threats, demands, creating a hostile situation by uninvited and unwelcome verbal or physical conduct. But at work, harassment is a special term. Often, workplace harassment connotes sexual misconduct. So what they're trying to say is that, oh, if it's harassment, then you're being sexually disrespected, when that's not necessarily true, but because it falls up under that umbrella, it's more difficult for the employee to prove. Okay, so they have state and federal civil rights laws are designed to protect workers from discriminatory, disparate treatment. If and only if you are a member of a protected status. There are 7 in the U.S. and 11 in Canada, and those being gender, race, religion, ethnicity, etc., and age, okay, and gender. So we want to make sure that we reiterate that. And so now you ask, well, who are the biggest culprits when it comes to bullying their employees? And unfortunate, my men, you got the number 1 spot. Yeah, sorry. And we know why that takes place. That's because women for so many years were not allowed to work. It's illegal, it's illegal to bully. While it's illegal, it's legal. Does that make any sense? I have a right to come to work just like everybody else. But because I choose to work at a standard, and not saying that your coworkers are not working to a standard, but because I choose to, or you choose to work at a standard that says that you will respect me at all costs, at all levels, now you're labeled as erratic. And I often tell people that when you label someone, if I say, my hair looks nice, then I have to explain why it looks nice. So don't allow someone to just put a label on you and say, well, they said, this, or they said that. In the age of information, learn to read. Learn to read, but also read with the expectation of comprehending. Now, I know I broke that down. It was kind of funny. But read with the expectation of comprehending what you read. And understand that the laws are changing as we speak. They're constant. So even though a law is today, it may be different tomorrow. So you want to make sure that you understand all the technicalities when it comes to the law. While I am not a lawyer and not giving legal advice, that really is just kind of a common sense thing, but I just want to kind of share that because sometimes people are lost, they don't know where to begin. And, so then you ask yourself, you say, well, how can your employer get away with doing these things? Well, it says, if your employer actually did nothing, you're luckier than others who suffer retaliation for reporting bullying. Employers who have to follow state and federal laws or risk lawsuits that could carry punitive damages. Bullying is legal in every U.S. state. So you're saying you have these laws in place, but yet it's legal. So why am I even reporting that I'm being mistreated if it's legal? Listeners and viewers, you've got to read. And if you don't know something, connect yourself with someone who's smarter than you. I would even go so far as to get to know your alderman. Get to know in your area who's in legislation. So that if it's something that you are not privy to, you may now have access to. You may have access to how the laws are interpreted. Because at the end of the day, it's all about how the laws are interpreted. And for most of us, sadly, we don't read. We leave our rights in the hands of others. And I am a firm believer that no one can defend you better than you can defend yourself. The time that we spend putting in our weave, the time that we spend putting on our faces, the time that we spend at these parties all this weekend, if you take 1 hour, for some of y'all got a long weekend, and just read a couple of chapters in a book, I guarantee you will know more than you did yesterday. It's something else. And I often hear friends of mine who, and have witnessed actually, people that were mistreated. And it's interesting that you are a good employee if you turn a blind eye. But if you speak out, like how people always say, oh, you're not being politically correct. And I said, well, let me break being politically correct down. To be politically correct means that you are willing to turn a blind eye to the injustices of people. And unfortunately, my God is higher than man, which won't allow me to turn a blind eye. Is it legal, you ask yourself? While there are no laws, it's never legal for someone to disrespect you. Now, for every law, there's a loophole. Now, I don't have to be an attorney. I'm not an attorney to know that. But I do know for every law, there's a loophole. For every standard of operating procedure that has been written, got to learn how to read between the cracks. You have to make people respect you. Doesn't mean that you have to get violent. You don't have to get indignant. But you don't have to be mistreated. I'm going to dedicate, I want to say, the next couple of weeks to this subject. And the reason that I want to dedicate and spend so much time on this subject, because at this very hour, somebody is contemplating that they're just tired. Somebody don't know who to talk to. If you feel that you are on edge, I want you to contact your local police department, seek out professional help, and talk to a close friend, and just let somebody know that you have had enough. I would never advocate you're hurting yourself or hurting anyone else for that matter. So often we see these workplace things that take place. Is it because the person was just out of their mind, or were they tired of being bullied? These are things that we need to examine. So call your local legislation, call your alderman, call your local schools, jump on somebody's campaign. that bullying in the workplace will not be tolerated. Once again, I want to thank you on this holiday weekend for tuning in to Sidestreets and Intersections here on IntellectualRadio.com. I am Angela Champ. We are an iHeart radio station. If you are looking for an opportunity to explore hosting your own show, please do not hesitate to call 708-223-8953. Remember, you are being bullied. It's not your fault. And on that note, until then.